Here in Wales, we have some of the areas most dependent on disability benefits out of anywhere in the UK. The UK government's plans to cut welfare spending over the next few years has been deeply uncomfortable territory for Labour, and there's opposition within the party's ranks about the changes. Giving evidence to a Senedd committee on Friday, the First Minister, Eluned Morgan, said she wanted to reserve her position until she knew what the impact would be on Wales. Let's take a look back now at the week's events.
Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves.
Now our task is to secure Britain's future in a world that is changing before our eyes.
In her spring statement, the Chancellor announced the government would spend an extra £2.2 billion on defence, but to pay for that, a squeeze on benefits and a cut of 15% to departmental spending. In Swansea, disabled people made their feelings about the changes known.
It's our right to live in society the same as everybody else. And without the disabled funding from the government, how can we do that?
Are you in panic mode, Chancellor?
Sticking to her self-imposed spending rules has big consequences, with 3 million families expected to be worse off by her cuts to the welfare budget, but 4 million expected to benefit. In Newport and Cross Hands, there was some sympathy for the changes.
Too many people, I think, try taking advantage of the system, definitely. It needs changing.
I think the benefits get misused by people who just want to scam the benefit system, so to speak, but I think there are people who genuinely need them benefits.
You've got to defend your own country, haven't you? You know what I mean? The world has gone now. There's so many dictators about, you know. They're warmongers, I call them.
I agree with it if there's somebody, how do you put it, abusing it. But the genuine ones, no. I don't think they should even cut anybody's genuine benefit because they're entitled to it, especially if they've been a taxpayer, worked all their life.
But with a higher proportion of the Welsh population receiving benefits, the First Minister on last week's Politics Wales said she was concerned and wanted to see a Welsh impact statement. On Wednesday, she was still waiting for a response. But the Secretary of State for Wales claimed Eluned Morgan was supportive of the plans.
Because it's an England and Wales policy, is an England and Wales impact assessment.
Was the First Minister right to ask for this assessment then? Do you support that call she made?
So the First Minister wrote supporting the reforms that we are making. I was really pleased to see backing for the reforms, backing for the need to cut spending overall.
She's disappointed not to get this assessment. She's not had a reply.
Well, I'm not in charge of the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions email inbox.
But pressed on that on Friday, the First Minister was tight-lipped.
I have yet to get a firm understanding of how that will impact on Wales, and until I'm clear about the impacts, I want to reserve my position in relation to that.
Well, that's very different to what the Secretary of State said, because she's on record as saying that the First Minister wrote supporting the reforms we're making, and I was really pleased to see backing for those reforms.
The Chancellor was in Wales this week announcing a housing policy, something that her government doesn't have responsibility for here. It's devolved. She insisted both Labour governments on either side of the M4 were in conversation, but it seems they may not be in agreement on her plans to build up the economy. Well, let's discuss this further with Kanishka Narayan, Labour MP for the Vale of Glamorgan, Plaid Cymru's Treasury spokesperson, Ben Lake, and for the Welsh Conservatives, we have their finance spokesperson in the Senedd, Sam Rowlands. Thank you, gentlemen, for making time to join us this morning, and I'm hoping at least we will be spared the technical difficulties that we have just endured with Ken Skates. But let's start with you, Kanishka Narayan. It's been put to me that it doesn't sound like a Labour government, that this wouldn't be the kind of thing that a Labour government would do. How do you defend putting an extra 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, into relative poverty?
Well, to Larry, on the central question of what is Labour about this government, let me say three particular things. One, restoring economic stability, so we're putting more pounds into people's pockets. Two, overturning the context of austerity we've had, tens of billions more in terms of day-to-day spend, 100 billion more in capital spend over 5 years. And yes, three, fundamental reform of public services and a welfare context that is both immoral in terms of supporting people into work and unsustainable in the long term for the country. That is deeply Labour from my point of view.
You know, you can say that it's the end to austerity, but most people won't feel that way. And isn't ultimately politics about the way people feel?
It is totally about what people feel. And that's why I think we've done a thing which is very clearly the opposite of austerity. If you take Barry and the Vale of Glamorgan, Larry, we've already put more funding into capital spending. You can see that on the roads being resurfaced and potholes. You can already see 40 million for Barry straight from the Treasury into the hands of the local authority and people in the community deciding how that's spent. And public services now better supported so that, yes, things like NHS waiting lists are coming down. People are going to feel this. And in the long term, by the way, the fundamental thing on the Spring Statement was the OBR saying that at the end of this Parliament, unlike a historic low in the last Parliament, people are going to feel much better off every year.
Yeah, well, they kind of revised their growth forecasts for this year down, didn't they? But they did say that it would be better in the coming
years. This is really important. And you're totally right that this year's forecasts have been weighed down globally. But even on this year's particular measure, what you'll see is when we came into government, the UK was supposed to be the 7th fastest growing country in terms of the OECD. We're now the 2nd. So, of course, global pressures mean that the level is more challenging across the board. But on a relative basis, in the face of those pressures, we're staring at them, we're facing them down, growing this country.
Ben Lake, I'll turn to you next. This does need to happen, doesn't it, in order to balance the books, in order to pay for defence, which is, surely it's important that we keep everybody safe. And is this necessary, do you think, or is it justified?
There's no doubt that we need to make sure that we can defend ourselves. Of course there is. But I think the question in contention here is how you pay for that. And I think many people are a little bit alarmed, a little bit shocked that the decisions in this week's statement seem to have come to the conclusion that it is those that are the most vulnerable in society that should shoulder the burden for it. And that's what's really quite alarming and quite surprising, perhaps, about this week's statement.
Sam Rowlands, I'll turn to you next. You must be quite pleased. This feels like a very, conservative policy to cut welfare. Does it mean to be fiscally responsible? Do you welcome these changes?
Well, I think what the emergency budget showed this week is that Labour are just all over the place. They recognise now that massive mistakes were made in Rachel Reeves' budget last year, because we're seeing inflation double from what it was predicted to be. We're seeing the economy growth halving from what it should have been as well. And what's really bad about these welfare changes is that, yes, we want to see public spending working as efficiently as possible, but because these have been rushed through so much, we're going to see the worst of both worlds. We're going to see those people impacted by it not being treated fairly, and we're not going to see the efficiencies that reform in this area would deliver. So we're seeing a rushed through set of emergency measures because Rachel Reeves messed up the budget so badly last year. What do you make of that, Commissioner Ryan? Is it the Conservatives are calling it the Spring Statement an emergency budget, but are these, is this panic from the Chancellor? Are these changes being rushed through? Larry, I'm sure for Sam and Conservatives, the Liz Truss experience is so steeped in their mind that they think every budget or Spring Statement is going to be an emergency one. It's not. That's in the past. We've moved on, stabilised the country. We're in a different place. But look, the big thing I'll say in light of what we've heard is it's very easy to be the party of no. But as I said at the very outset, the welfare context is genuinely a context that is both immoral, it is not getting enough people the support they need to get into work. A quarter of people in Wales are working age, not in work or not looking for work. Surely that is not a context that anyone can accept. And yes, of course, it's a sustainability question in the long term as well. We want to make sure that the support we have is deep, but it also comes with high expectations so that we can move on as a country. I wanted to put to you something that was said on Sunday Supplement, our sister radio programme on Radio Wales this morning by Alan Davies, the MS, the Senedd member, Labour Senedd member for Blaenau Gwent. He's saying people are terrified at the thought of these changes. That must worry you. I know you could justify them in a political studio, but on a human level, to say that people are terrified, that must be a source of great concern for you personally. My starting point in politics, Larry, is a context of making sure that you start with empathy for individuals. And to me, when I'm out knocking
do these changes do that?
The big thing I'd say when it comes to the question of what people are feeling, and I know people are feeling uncertainty and anxiety because I've received emails about it as well. I think there are two things that are really critical. One, I think it's really critical that we take this in a context of responsibility in politics and don't misrepresent what has been proposed. The diagnosis, I think we all agree on, change needs to happen. And then the second thing I'd say in terms of the specific prescription, the changes proposed, we're in a consultation period. We've got almost 3 months of consultation. I'm going to be making sure that the voices of people in the Vale of Glamorgan are deeply represented, and I'd encourage everyone to treat this with a level of sensitivity in light of what you've described, but to focus on both the proposals and what comes through on the other side.
Ben Lake, I'll turn to you now. We heard in that package there, we've heard voices across Wales this week. This isn't actually an unpopular move. People do feel that there needs to be, reform of the welfare state, and people do feel that some people do, take advantage of it.
Well, of course, and that's one of the things that we've been saying in response to the budget, that the government would be wrong to say that these are brave decisions to make. At the end of the day, as you said, or as we heard in that video package, people have a certain perception of what is being proposed and support that perception. But the reality is 4.5 billion of the cuts announced this week, 4.5 billion out of 4.8, will fall on working age, sickness and disability benefits. Now, if we then consider the Department for Work and Pensions' own reports, they publish an annual report as to fraud in the benefit system, the rate of fraud in personal independence payment, for example, is considered so low that they assign it a rating of 0%. So I do think that we need to be very careful as politicians to be peddling this narrative that those people with disabilities in Wales and across the UK are somehow gaming the system. The reality is, as confirmed by government's own reports and statistics, that is not the truth. That is not the case. And at the end of the day, half of all people in Wales with disabilities are already in employment. What we're talking about here is ensuring that they have those much vital support to ensure that they can live full and fulfilling lives. And as far as I'm concerned, I thought that is exactly the type of function that the state should perform to support the most vulnerable.
Sam Rowlands, some Labour MPs and MSs have offered kind of alternative ways of making the books balance. A wealth tax. Would you support a wealth tax?
We're a party of low tax, so any sort of tax changes we would consider very closely before looking at any of those. And what we have to remember in front of us here today, though, is that a Labour government has come into power with a fundamental platform, in their words, and we've heard it again here today, that they recognise they need to improve the economy, and they've clearly failed.
After 14 years of your party's government, I should.
Well, let's be clear on that, Larry. When we left government in July, rightfully so, that's what the electorate wanted, we left the country as the fastest growing economy in the G7. I've already outlined that the OBR have halved the economic growth since Labour have been in power, and inflation has doubled from what it's predicted to be since Labour have been in power as well. And the bigger issue here is actually the trust that the public can have in this Labour Party. They said they would not be taxing working people. We've seen the increased measures on national insurance, which is hammering businesses up and down Wales and putting people out of jobs and suppressing the growth in jobs that we need to see. Labour said they would not be targeting our farmers through inheritance tax. We've seen that come through now, and that's going to hammer our farmers up and down Wales. We need to see that trust restored in our politics. Labour are doing their utmost to erode that trust, and that's going to have a detrimental impact in the long run for people here in Wales.
Sam Rowlands does make a good point there, I think, in terms of the trust, what people voted for and what they're getting, Kanishka Narayan. How are you worried about broken promises, essentially?
Well, I think it's 8 months into a government. I think to say that we've broken promises would be premature. We've stood on a platform of two things: economic security and stability. That is the fundamental focus.
But also growth and people being better off, people having more money in their pockets.
Absolutely, and that's exactly what I mean by economic security. Already the OBR has said, as a result of our policies and us coming into government, people are going to be better off by the end of this parliament in terms of pounds in their pockets. Already we're seeing the waiting list context in healthcare improving. Already we're seeing potholes in our infrastructure, the pride that we feel in our places, improving. Already we've brought in 40 million straight into Barry and the Vale of Glamorgan so that people will get to decide in our community what the future of their community looks like. That, to me, is about restoring trust back in public service.
What about this issue of a Welsh impact statement, this row that's kind of brewing, I think it's fair to say, between Eluned Morgan and the Secretary of State for Wales. The Secretary of State for Wales, well, first of all, Eluned Morgan writes to Liz Kendall asking for an impact statement. She still hasn't had a Welsh-specific impact statement. Joe Stevens then goes on Wales Today this week and says, the First Minister is supportive of these reforms, when actually the letter was just asking for clarity. I think that's how I read it. And we saw in that piece there Eleanor Morgan clearly unhappy, uncomfortable, you could say angry at the Secretary of State for the way that she's kind of, I dare say, misrepresented her there. Do you think there needs to be a Welsh impact statement?
Well, I think the position is actually very clear, and I know it's easy to try and speculate about wedges in politics, but I actually think the position is clear. The position is as follows. The First Minister agrees that there's a fundamental need to reform our welfare system.
Yes, I think that's a fair representation of what she said. What she did not say was that she was supportive of these specific cuts.
Of course. So the position is, the diagnosis is absolutely clear, and we agree on it. She's written to the Work and Pension Secretary. I understand that she's received a response. And as far as the prescription is concerned, look, of course, we're in a consultation period. The First Minister is entitled to say that she wants to work very closely and in a mature and serious way.
Does there need to be a Welsh
governments.
impact statement, do you think, considering the fact that Wales is disproportionately impacted?
This is a UK-wide policy, England and Wales policy, right? There has been an equality assessment looking at the impact by protected characteristic. Now, of course, you could say, well, you need to dive into the Welsh aspect specifically, but the reality is we've already broken down the likely impact by types of people and the expectation of what that does. In Wales, we know this is a greater problem than everywhere else, and so we need a focus and a moral sense of a focus on the problem here particularly.
Ben Lake, I'll put that to you, as your party's made much of the differences between the party, but briefly, if you could, do you accept that an England and Wales impact statement in this case is sufficient?
No, not at all. I think it's good government and good policy making to ensure that you have as much data as humanly possible as to the impact of a policy, to ensure, first and foremost, that it works, to realise some of the stated objectives that Kishka mentioned there, and also to safeguard against unintended consequences and harm. So I think it does need to have a Welsh impact assessment.
We've run out of time, I'm afraid, but we are very grateful to you all for coming on into the lines